Throughout Adventure Time's 283 episode catalog, the show tackled almost every topic imaginable, but perhaps none as much and as well as the theme of grief. Illustrated in different ways throughout the show, one of the most poignant is in the stories of Betty and Magic Man and their respective journeys to try and bring back their loved ones, and how they parallel each other. And no episode showcases this as well as Season 6, Episode 8, You Forgot Your Floaties, an episode so full of fantastic shots and mind-numbing metaphors that it basically begs for a 600-second or so breakdown of it all, and that's exactly what we're doing today. In this video, we're going to go through the terrific episode, explain all the seemingly meaningless phrases that come out of Magic Man's mouth, and talk about how it uses parallel stories to resolve one grieving lover's struggle and supercharge another.
Is that Betty?
Betty's dead.
Disappeared doesn't always mean dead.
The episode opens up with Finn and Jake against this beautiful plains background trying to track down the helmet of Glob after he exploded in space back in Astral Plane, as Finn explains that the pair are scavengers as he seemingly wants the helmet for sentimental purposes, setting up the theme of the episode of trying to hold on to the past. When the pair approach the helmet, they see Betty, who quickly sprints off to Magic Man's house, a location that immediately brings up some unfortunate memories for the pair, as Finn resolves to just bail before things get out of hand. Of course, they don't, and we get the funniest sequence of the episode with Finn and Jake getting turned into eggs and soup and being placed on a shelf with Tiny Manticore, who's been struck with some serious Stockholm Syndrome, and a nice piece of foreshadowing with a picture of Magic Man and his deceased wife, Margles. Meanwhile, down in the basement, Magic Man reveals his plan for the helmet of his brother to transfer himself into the new Glob with the help of Betty Sweat in order to become the new ruler of Mars and wreak havoc, which is a pretty standard plan for the guy. Betty, it turns out, is there as part of her initiative to study the connection between supernatural ability and manic depression, something she calls MMS, or Magic, Madness, and Sadness, something that she believes that if she can learn about, she can control within Simon. Of course, finding magic and madness in Magic Man is pretty easy, but she's hunting for sadness, something she initially believes to be the death of his brother, but he seems to see Glob's death as more of an opportunity than a tragedy. When she brings up the framed picture of him and Margles, he responds with what seems like a less than coherent metaphor about a coconut crab in a swimming pool that I'm gonna somewhat skip past for now, but trust me, we're gonna spend way too long talking about crabs in about 5 minutes or so. Betty responds to this statement, somehow understanding and agreeing with it. Meanwhile, Tiny Manticore explains to Egg Finn and Soup Jake that Magic Man is just using Betty, something that's pretty obvious to everybody including her, and kicks off some more shenanigans that ultimately result in Betty re-encountering the photo of Margles and pocketing it before continuing with the transmutation. Magic Man continues to speak in riddles at this point, describing his mind as a wastebasket with the marble gray floors of a bank, and when the procedure begins, Betty finds that, unlike usual, this time he wasn't lying. Just like a normal bank, the bank on Magic Man's mind has a vault where the valuables are kept behind a locked door, and luckily Betty has the key, as the picture of Margles transforms into a mask that fully transforms her into Margles as she enters the deepest part of Magic Man's mind and begins to live out his most tragic memory. Pretty quickly into this flashback, we learn that we aren't following the original Margles, but one fashioned by Magic Man to combat the second coming of Golb, something that he's especially sensitive to given that the first coming is what resulted in the original Margles being taken from him. Glob is obviously pretty skeptical of his brother putting all of his angst regarding his dead wife into the only hope their civilization has against Golb, but his words of concern fall on deaf ears as Magic Man reassures him that things are definitely going to be okay, and that MARGLES, or Magical Automated Resistance Generating Laser Energy Supplier, is just a tribute and definitely not anything nefarious. As Magic Man hikes up Olympus Mons with his creation, she seems less than receptive to his small talk, instead just telling him that since she was created from his thoughts, any conversation between the two would be redundant. This kind of stuns Magic Man, who skips the rest of his hike and takes us to the peak, where Margle begins to transform transform into her defense mode, in which she becomes a creature that resembles Baphomet, emphasizing the demonic nature of this vision. Given that this memory is from the perspective of Magic Man, it's pretty likely that this is just him focusing on how horrific the vision was, but either way, he becomes terrified by what this tribute to his wife has become as he tries to stop her. This does eventually work, but with two pretty devastating consequences. First, he gets pretty jacked up and electrocuted by this facade of his fallen lover, and two, he inadvertently ends up sending her to her death off the side of the mountain. Except, in this memory, as a result of Finn shenanigans that I've been neglecting to mention because they really weren't that important, Magic Man and Betty end up swapping places in the flashback, foreshadowing the lasting impact of the episode, being that after they exit, Magic Man's magic has shifted to Betty, as symbolized through her taking his hat, and while Magic Man seems pretty okay after the events that just unfolded, Betty immediately begins to maniacally unravel as a result of her newfound power. She continues the crab metaphor as we once again see the neighbor's pool, this time with Simon appearing at the surface and mouthing the title of the episode, which is honestly one of my favorite shots of the entire series, as the complete silence being cut by Betty's scream creates this genuinely terrifying collection of sounds, but I'll cycle back to its thematic importance in a second as I quickly wrap up the episode. Betty bails, Finn and Jake, now a collective bread-like creature, get Tiny Manicore to fly them to Wizard City to get turned back into human and dog, and Magic Man begins his new life as Normal Man.
What do normies do? Get smoothies or something?
Alright, I've been hyping it up for the last 5 minutes or so let's go ahead and talk about the two-part crab metaphor. First off, Betty goes ahead and defines what the pool itself represents, being the loomy gloom that all magic users swim in. Everything else the episode leaves up to interpretation, so let's start with the crab in the room, of which there tends to not be a consensus for online. While I think the most likely option is that the crab is just a creature that happens to float in water, let me throw my definitely not correct, but kind of fun to think about theory for why it's a crab in the pool instead of any other animal. Carcinization is an evolutionary phenomenon where crustaceans tend to eventually evolve into a crab over time and across thousands of years, which gives this metaphor a secondary meaning of emphasizing the inevitable nature of magic users entering this kind of brain fog, where they're this mix of manic outbursts and depressive episodes, which brings up another interesting question regarding this episode's concept of MMS. Does magic bring about sadness and madness, or vice versa? This episode ends up answering both, and it gives us examples of it going either way, with the pairing of Betty, whose madness and sadness results in her getting magic, and Simon, whose magic results in him becoming mad and depressed. Anyway, back to the crab in the pool. At the end of the episode, we see the metaphorical Simon Crab hybrid, who floats to the top and mouths, "You forgot your floaties," which besides just being a ridiculously terrific shot, also has thematic meaning as he's telling this to Betty. She's gone swimming through the pool looking for a connection to Simon, and while she finally has it in the form of her newfound magic powers, she forgot her floaties, or her connection to the same world, and is doomed to drown in the loomy gloom with him. In her attempts to save somebody from the magic that curses them, all she's done is get inflicted with it herself, leaving them both with both immense madness and immense sadness. Of course, this newfound magic ability doesn't come from nowhere, as she inadvertently takes it from Magic Man, who seems freed from his madness and his sadness at the end of the episode, something that proves to be true as seen through his appearances as Normal Man throughout the rest of the series, as he tries to undo the damage he caused while in his manic state. Coincidentally, Betty actually does the exact same thing when her magic is removed in the finale, but back to Magic Man. While it's easy to assume that he seems entirely emotionally better just because his magic was removed, and that's definitely a part of it, it's worth mentioning that he comes to this conclusion after he's forced to confront the memory of Margles 2.0 that he locked away in his brain. Magic Man has always been a character that wasn't entirely connected to reality, but it turns out this isn't just because he's always been crazy, but because he's been repressing traumatic memories for the duration of the series, while he's just been torturing Finn and Jake to get his mind off of the past. And when Betty forces him to remember what happened, he deals with it and leaves the loomy gloom that all magic dealers swim in, ultimately damning Betty to take his place. You Forgot Your Floaties is an episode I don't hear talked about a ton, but I think that it works really well as both a link and eventually Adventure Time's impressive plot, as it sends Magic Man towards redemption and Betty towards destruction, but also as an episode with some of my favorite bits of Adventure Time-y weirdness that ends up having actual thematic importance, as there is just a litany of fantastic shots in this episode that already has a pretty wacky premise, all of which create some of the funkiest 11 minutes of animation that I've ever seen. In a series that tackles loss in many different episodes throughout and in many different ways, You Forgot Your Floaties provides one of the most interesting looks at the topic, as it links together sadness and magic in a way that truly recontextualizes every wizard in the entire show. Anyway, that's about it for me. If you have an episode of Adventure Time or any other cartoon you want to see me give this kind of breakdown to, leave it down in the comments, and if you want a more direct way to tell me that my interpretation of this episode is junk, you can find my Twitter in the description as well, where you can also just happen to see what I'm working on next. Either way, this has been AmpleSamuel, and I'll see you in about a week or so with a video about an empathetic gumball machine. Thanks for watching.